Hi, I'm Jim Inhofe, a conservative Republican senator from Oklahoma. For over the past decade, I've been successful in leading the opposition in the United States Senate against the global warming alarmist agenda. Throughout my fight, one of my primary concerns has been the effect of the global warming movement, so-called solutions on the poor, whether it's here in the United States or around the world. Much of my concern comes from my extensive travel in Africa, where I have seen and heard firsthand the negative impacts of the United Nations environmental policies. What I'm now going to tell you will likely shock you, but it's important that you know the truth about the agenda embraced by the radical environmentalists. In just 2 weeks, the United Nations will host their latest global warming conference in Durban, South Africa. Now, you remember these conferences, such as the one last year in Cancun or the one the year before in Copenhagen. These are opportunities for the world's diplomats to get together for a lavish extravaganza subsidized by you, the American taxpayers. The biggest travesty is usually when they run out of caviar. Yet the brutal irony this year is that while these diplomats enjoy yet another expensive, extravagant trip, the policies implemented at these conferences are having a devastating effect on the world's poor. Consider that in Uganda, 20,000 farmers were brutally kicked off their lands to allow a British company to plant trees for carbon credits. This news, by the way, comes from a recent report issued by Oxfam. That's O-X-F-A-M. That's by no means a conservative organization. Oxfam tells us that armed guards burned houses to the ground, which at least in one case resulted in the death of a child. According to one victim who was interviewed by Oxfam investigators, her family was beaten by soldiers and no longer has enough food to eat. In Honduras, United Nations sanctioned industry stole farmland and murdered 23 farmers and their families between January of 2010 and March of 2011. This is according to a report by the International Fact-Finding Mission that was presented to the European Parliament. Private security guards employed by this industry were reported to be directly involved, feigning accidents and shooting farmers. In addition to these atrocities, some governments have been seeking credit or recognition by the United Nations for using population control as a way to mitigate greenhouse gases. China, for example, is seeking climate credit for its national policies on family planning. According to the government of China's 2007 National Climate Change Program, and I'm quoting now, it said, since the implementation of the family planning program, over 300 million births have been averted nationally by 2005. Averted births have resulted in an annual reduction of CO2 emissions by 1.3 billion tons in 2005, end quote. That's a quote. You know, as a proud father and grandfather of 20 kids and grandkids, it just makes me sick. Today, I'm sending a letter to Secretary Clinton demanding an immediate investigation into these alleged crimes in Africa and Latin America. I'm also urging the State Department to use its influence to block any country, such as China, from gaining climate credit for human lives avoided. The United States should not turn a blind eye to climate proponents pushing an agenda that views humanity as the enemy. If these disturbing trends continue, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change will certainly become inconsistent with the laws of our land, including the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And if they are not resolved speedily and satisfactorily, I'm going to call on the United States to withdraw from this UN global warming framework, which in my opinion would put a stop to the insanity that has resulted in these deplorable acts against the world's poor and defenseless. In the meantime, I'll also look for ways, together with my colleagues, to cut off U.S. funding to this organization unless these human rights abuses are addressed. While we have been successful in Congress in exposing the global warming hoax, their efforts continue. We've soundly defeated all the legislative attempts at cap and trade, and they don't have half the votes necessary in the United States Senate to get it passed. So now President Obama is trying to implement his global warming cap and trade agenda through regulation because he couldn't do it through legislation. Our next mission is to bring these more recent crimes to light so that everyone can see the full extent of this extreme agenda, and we're going to do it.